Duke Conrad Halston tore his wife's name from the royal contract and replaced it with his brother's. From this hour forward, Caldermere Glassworks will operate under Lord Sebastian Halston's authority. A heavy silence fell over the counting room. Duchess Theodora Halston watched her husband press the amended document flat upon the oak table, covering the place where her signature had stood for nearly 8 years. Around them waited 2 palace commissioners, the estate solicitor, and 6 senior craftsmen still wearing their leather aprons. Beyond the windows, the furnaces glowed orange through the early dusk. Sebastian accepted the iron ring of workshop keys with a restrained smile. Belhaven requires a man's authority, Conrad continued, not the private experiments of a woman who refuses to explain where the crown's silver has gone. Theodora felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. She did not look at the commissioners, she looked at her husband. 3 days earlier, Conrad had demanded that she approve Sebastian's cheaper formula for the windows of the king's new western palace. She had refused because the mixture contained too much alkali and had never survived a full cooling test. Conrad had called her cautious. Sebastian had called her jealous. Now an accusation of theft had appeared precisely when they needed her removed. "You know where the silver went," Theodora said. "It was used to strengthen the mirror backing and the decorative borders requested by the palace architect. Every ounce is recorded, not in the ledgers found in your office." "Then those are not my ledgers." Conrad's jaw tightened. For one brief moment, she saw uncertainty in his face. He could have ordered the books examined. He could have asked Master Hollis, who had witnessed every delivery. Instead, Conrad glanced toward the palace commissioners and chose pride over doubt. "My wife's access to the accounts is revoked," he declared. "Her private fund is frozen until the missing silver is recovered." Theodora's breath caught. That fund did not pay for gowns or jewels. It supported workers burned by molten glass and families whose husbands had lost their sight at the furnaces. "Those payments are due tomorrow. They will remain suspended." An elderly craftsman stepped forward. "Your Grace, the Duchess saved this glassworks when the old furnace collapsed. She trained half the men standing here." Sebastian turned sharply. "You were not invited to speak, Mr. Alden." Theodora raised one hand before the craftsman could ruin himself defending her. Conrad noticed the gesture and mistook restraint for defiance. "You will leave the glassworks before sunset," he said. "Your office will be sealed. Until this inquiry is concluded, you will not communicate with any worker employed here." Theodora removed the small brass key from the chain at her waist and placed it on the table. Unlike the heavy workshop keys, it opened only her formula cabinet. Sebastian reached for it. She closed her fingers around the key before he could touch it. "That cabinet contains unstable mixtures and failed trials. If you open it without me, someone may be injured." Sebastian gave a soft laugh. "Still attempting to frighten us with mysteries?" "No. Attempting to prevent your incompetence from killing someone." Conrad struck the table with his palm. "That is enough." Theodora looked at the man she had married 11 years earlier, the man who had once stood beside her in a smoke-filled workshop and promised the glassworks would bear both their names. Now he could barely meet her eyes. She set down the key. "You may remove my name from the contract," she said quietly, "but you cannot command glass to obey a lie." Then she turned and walked out. No one followed her. By the time Theodora reached Caldermere Hall, servants had already been ordered to remove the account books from her study. Conrad had not merely dismissed her. He was erasing every trace of her authority before she could defend it. She had just begun writing from memory the serial numbers of the missing silver deliveries when a faint knock sounded at the servants' entrance below. Minutes later, her maid brought a frightened apprentice into the study. Thomas Reed was 16, thin as a furnace rod, with blood dried along one cuff. He carried a long bundle wrapped in coarse cloth. "Master Sebastian told us no one was to speak to you," he whispered. "But Mr. Alden said you were the only person who would understand." Theodora unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a narrow fragment from one of the palace windows. Its polished surface reflected the candlelight in perfect waves, yet a crack ran through its center. Suspended within that fracture was a thread-like line of black material. Theodora lifted the fragment toward the flame. Her pulse quickened. A flaw on the surface could come from careless transport. A bubble might come from poor stirring. But that black thread had entered while the glass was still molten, inside a guarded furnace from which Sebastian had claimed nothing could be stolen or altered. "Which batch?" "Number 47. That batch passed inspection." "I know, Your Grace. I marked the crates myself." Thomas glanced toward the corridor, then lowered his voice. "There is something else. The pane did not break in London. It cracked in the loading yard before it left Caldermere." "Then why was it shipped?" Lord Sebastian ordered us to pack it behind the sound panes. He said the palace would blame the carriers. Theodora examined the black thread again. It was not soot. It had a faint metallic sheen, like residue from slag added deliberately to weaken the mixture. Did you see anyone near the furnace before the pour? Thomas hesitated. I saw Mr. Vale, the new clerk, carrying a covered bucket through the mixing room. When I asked what it held, he struck me and told me to forget. Theodora looked at the blood on his sleeve. Before she could question him further, carriage wheels thundered across the courtyard. A royal messenger entered the hall carrying another broken pane inside a padded case. Tied around it was a note bearing the palace architect's seal. Theodora broke the wax. This was not the formula you approved. She laid the two fragments together. Both bore the same batch number, but their color and weight were subtly different. Someone was replacing the royal glass after inspection. A second line had been added to the architect's message. The next shipment contains the great windows for the king's coronation gallery. Installation begins in 7 days. Behind Theodora, the study door opened. Conrad stood on the threshold, his expression darkening as he saw the apprentice, the royal message, and the forbidden glass in his wife's hands. Tell me, he said, why the first shattered palace window has been brought directly to you. Conrad closed the study door behind him. Thomas stepped back, nearly knocking over the chair. Theodora moved between the apprentice and her husband before Conrad could summon a servant. The pane was sent by the palace architect, she said. The boy brought the second fragment from the loading yard. Conrad held out his hand. Give me the letter. Theodora passed it to him. His expression changed as he read the warning, but suspicion soon hardened his face again. You were forbidden to communicate with the Glassworks. I did not summon Thomas, but he came directly to you, because Sebastian ordered a damaged window shipped after it cracked. Thomas swallowed. I saw it, Your Grace. Conrad turned on him. And how much did the Duchess pay you to say that? The boy went pale. Theodora's restraint broke. He is 16 years old, and someone struck him for asking what was carried into your guarded mixing room. Look at his sleeve. Conrad saw the dried blood, yet still hesitated. That hesitation told Theodora more than an accusation could. He no longer judged evidence by whether it was credible. He judged it by whether accepting it would force him to admit he had chosen wrongly. She placed the two fragments side by side. Both are marked as batch 47, but they are not the same glass. This one came from the approved mixture. The palace fragment contains too much alkali and an unknown metallic contaminant. Conrad examined them without touching either. Can you prove that? With access to the laboratory. You no longer have access. Then send the fragments to an independent glassmaker. And announce to every competitor in England that Caldermere cannot control its own furnaces? Theodora stared at him. You are more afraid of embarrassment than of a royal window collapsing. The windows have not been installed. The coronation gallery shipment leaves tomorrow. Conrad folded the architect's letter. Sebastian assured me the new panes are sound. Sebastian also concealed a cracked pane, according to an apprentice who violated a direct order. Thomas lowered his head. Theodora placed a protective hand on his shoulder. You will not punish him. I decide who is punished on my estate, and I decide whether I allow a child to be sacrificed for your brother's deception. For several seconds, neither moved. The marriage between them seemed to narrow to the space separating their bodies. A few feet filled with 11 years of trust, now poisoned by Conrad's wounded pride. At last, he rang for the footman. Take the boy to the servants' hall. See that his injury is treated. He is not to leave Caldermere Hall tonight. Thomas looked fearfully at Theodora. You will be safe here, she promised. Conrad waited until the door closed. You undermined me in front of everyone, he said. I warned you privately before you humiliated me publicly. You refused every economy Sebastian proposed. Because glass does not become stronger merely because cheaper ingredients please your accounts. His eyes flashed. Those accounts support an estate burdened by your endless experiments. My work won the palace commission that saved this estate, and you never allowed me to forget it. There it was, the truth beneath the accusation. Conrad had not removed her because he possessed proof of theft. He had removed her because every success of Caldermere Glassworks reminded him that its workers trusted her judgment more than his title. Theodora's anger cooled into something sharper. Tomorrow morning I will send these fragments to Professor Harcourt in London. No. He advised the crown on the glass used at Carlton House. His analysis will be accepted by the commissioners. I said no. Conrad stepped forward and gathered both fragments into the padded case. Theodora caught his wrist. If you suppress this warning and someone is injured, you will not be able to blame Sebastian. You will not be able to blame me. The choice will be yours." For the first time, Conrad looked shaken. Then footsteps hurried along the corridor. The estate steward entered without waiting to be announced. "Your Grace, forgive me. There has been an accident at the works." Theodora released Conrad. "What happened?" The cooling room roof gave way. 3 men were beneath it. Her blood ran cold. Was Master Alden among them? The steward's silence answered her. Theodora seized her cloak and moved toward the door, but Conrad blocked her path. "You are forbidden from entering the Glassworks. Then stand aside and explain your authority to 3 dying men." She pushed past him. The cooling room was filled with smoke, dust, and the screams of injured workers. Part of the timber roof had collapsed across the stone floor, shattering dozens of newly finished panes. Men formed a line to carry buckets, while others dragged splintered beams away. Theodora dropped beside Master Alden. Blood ran from his temple, but he was conscious. "The support gave way," he whispered. It was cut. She looked toward the broken roof beam. The timber had not split under weight. A clean groove ran through its center, nearly invisible beneath a layer of dark grease. Someone had weakened it deliberately. "Your Grace," a worker shouted. At the far end of the room, Sebastian stood beside a wagon loaded with the coronation gallery windows. 4 horses were already harnessed. "What are you doing?" Theodora demanded. Sebastian climbed into the carriage. "Protecting the contract from your interference." Conrad entered behind her, breathing hard. "Sebastian, stop the shipment until the roof collapse is investigated." For the first time, his brother ignored him. The driver cracked the reins. As the wagon rolled toward the gates, Theodora saw a familiar mark painted beneath its rear axle, the emblem of a London merchant whose license had been revoked 5 years earlier for selling dangerously thin window glass under another maker's name. Sebastian was not merely altering Caldermere's formula, he was using the royal contract to deliver someone else's glass. Then flames rose from the records office behind the main furnace. "The ledgers!" Theodora shouted. Every document capable of proving which glass had left Caldermere was burning. Theodora ran toward the records office, but a burning beam crashed across the doorway. "Water here!" Conrad shouted. Workers formed another line from the courtyard pump. Theodora seized a wet cloth, covered her mouth, and crouched near the threshold. Flames had already consumed the shelves, yet a metal dispatch box remained beneath the fallen desk. She reached toward it. Conrad caught her around the waist and dragged her back as part of the ceiling collapsed. "Let me go! You will die for a box. That box contains the shipping seals." Before he could stop her again, Master Alden called from the cooling room. "Your Grace, the floor channel." Theodora understood. A narrow drainage channel ran beneath the records office and emerged beside the western wall. She hurried outside, knelt near its iron grate, and found several half-burned papers trapped in the water. One bore Sebastian's signature, another listed payments to Vale and Mercer, the London merchant whose emblem she had seen beneath the wagon. Conrad read the name over her shoulder. "You said their license was revoked. 5 years ago. Their glass cracked in freezing weather and injured 2 hotel servants." His face tightened. "Sebastian told me Mercer supplied only packing timber." He lied. A horse approached through the smoke. The rider wore the uniform of the Palace Commission. "Duke Halston," he announced. "By order of the Royal Works Office. All deliveries from Caldermere are suspended." 3 more panes shattered during unloading. One nearly struck the Prince Regent's architect. Conrad went still. "The cause is under investigation," the messenger continued. "The Crown requires your complete production and shipping records by noon tomorrow." Behind them, the records office roof collapsed in a storm of sparks. The messenger stared at the flames. "You will explain their destruction as well." When he departed, Conrad turned toward Theodora. "I will bring Sebastian back. He has several hours' lead. The wagon cannot reach London before morning. It is not going directly to London." She showed him the soaked payment sheet. Beside Vale and Mercer's name was a delivery point at an abandoned canal warehouse in Wareham. The false glass was likely transferred there before traveling under Caldermere's seal. Conrad summoned 2 mounted guards. Theodora stepped toward the stable. "You are staying here. I can identify the counterfeit glass. I will send for you if necessary. You dismissed my warnings, gave Sebastian control, and let him remove a royal shipment after an unexplained collapse. You do not get to silence me again." His expression hardened. "You remain under suspicion for the missing silver." Theodora unfolded the second burned paper. At the bottom was an order authorizing the transfer of 12 silver ingots from her workshop to Sebastian's private storeroom. The signature appeared to be hers, but the final stroke curved left. Theodora always ended her name to the right. A habit formed after an old injury stiffened her wrist. "It is forged," she said. Conrad studied it. He had watched her sign thousands of letters during their marriage. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by shame. Still, he did not apologize. "Prepare a carriage," he ordered. They left Caldermere before midnight. Theodora sat opposite Conrad without speaking, the counterfeit fragment wrapped securely beside her. The distance between them felt greater than the dark road outside. Near dawn, the carriage reached the abandoned warehouse. Its doors stood open, and fresh wheel tracks crossed the mud. Inside, they found dozens of empty crates bearing Caldermere's seal. A man lay unconscious beside them. It was Mr. Vale, the clerk Thomas had seen carrying the covered bucket. His hands were burned, and a broken chain hung from one wrist. Theodora knelt beside him. His eyes opened briefly. "Not London," he whispered. "The windows were sent to the palace under another duke's escort." Then they heard horses outside. Conrad's guards entered with drawn pistols, but behind them stood two crown officers holding a warrant. "Duke Halston," the senior officer said, "you are under investigation for supplying fraudulent glass to the royal household." He looked at Theodora. "And your wife is accused of stealing the silver used to finance it." The crown officers escorted Conrad and Theodora back to Caldermere under guard. They were not arrested, but neither was permitted to leave the estate. The royal commission would arrive within 2 days to examine the destroyed records, the missing silver, and the counterfeit panes. Mr. Vale was taken to a physician under military protection. Before the officers departed, one handed Conrad a copied invoice recovered in London. It recorded payment for 30 panes of inferior glass, all purchased under Theodora's name. Conrad stared at the signature. "It resembles yours." "So did the transfer order until you looked closely. This one may convince the commission." Theodora took the invoice. The handwriting was excellent, but the date revealed the forgery. "I was in Bath that week, negotiating the palace contract. Sebastian traveled with us." "Yes, but my formula notebook remained here." That notebook contained samples of her handwriting, private marks, and instructions for creating Caldermere's official seal. Sebastian had possessed everything necessary to imitate her. A servant entered before Conrad could respond. "Your Grace, Lord Sebastian has returned." They found him in the drawing room with his arm bandaged and his coat torn. He claimed masked thieves had seized the wagon, burned the records, and tried to kill him when he resisted. "You expect us to believe that?" Theodora asked. Sebastian's eyes filled with practiced outrage. "I was protecting your contract. You shipped glass you knew was defective, because you altered the mixture before Conrad dismissed you." Conrad looked between them. "Can you prove that?" Sebastian placed a small leather notebook on the table. It was Theodora's missing formula book. Several pages now contained instructions for weakening the palace glass with metallic slag. Beside them appeared her initials. Theodora turned the pages slowly. The handwriting was hers, but copied from unrelated entries, and pressed onto the paper through tracing. This was planted. Sebastian faced his brother. She knew the new management would expose the missing silver. She sabotaged the glass so you would beg her to return. Theodora waited for Conrad to reject the accusation. He did not. That silence hurt more than his words at the Glassworks. "You still doubt me," she said. "I must consider every possibility." "No. You are choosing the possibility that protects your pride." She closed the notebook and set it before him. "Keep it. Let the commissioners examine the ink, the pressure marks, and the order in which these pages were written." Sebastian's expression changed for only an instant. Theodora saw it. He feared examination, not of the handwriting, but of the paper itself. She tore a blank corner from the final page and held it toward the window. A faint watermark appeared within the fibers. The notebook had originally been made 8 years earlier, but the altered pages bore the mark of a London paper mill established only last year. Someone had removed the original sheets and sewn in replacements. Theodora turned toward Sebastian. "You forged the wrong paper." Before Conrad could order his brother detained, a pistol shot sounded from the courtyard. They rushed outside. Thomas, the apprentice, lay beside the fountain with blood spreading across his shoulder. A rider was disappearing through the gate. Clutched in Thomas's hand was a silver ingot stamped with Caldermere's crest, and wrapped around it was a shipping label addressed to Sebastian Halston. Theodora dropped beside Thomas and pressed both hands against his bleeding shoulder. "The bullet passed through," she said. "Bring clean linen and send for the surgeon." Thomas struggled to speak. "The silver, West Garden." Save your strength. More buried there. Conrad ordered the guards to seal every gate. Sebastian remained on the steps, pale but composed. That label proves nothing, he said. Anyone could have written my name. Theodora looked up at him. Then you will not object to a search. Sebastian took one step backward. Conrad saw it. Detain my brother. 2 guards seized Sebastian's arms. He resisted, shouting that Theodora had arranged everything. But Conrad did not release him. For the first time, he had acted before she was forced to prove the obvious. Workers dug beneath the west garden and uncovered a wooden chest containing 6 of the missing silver ingots. The remaining 6 were absent, but each recovered bar bore the same inventory marks recorded in Theodora's memory. Beneath them lay a packet of receipts from Vale and Mercer. The payments had been authorized with Conrad's ducal seal. He examined the impressions and became visibly shaken. I signed blank orders for Sebastian last month. How many? 12? He said the timber suppliers required immediate payment. You gave him unrestricted authority over your seal? I trusted my brother. You distrusted your wife without evidence, but handed your brother 12 signed orders. Conrad lowered his eyes. I was wrong. Theodora stood. That admission belongs before the workers and the commissioners, not only before me. A guard approached carrying a small pistol recovered near the garden wall. Sebastian immediately denied owning it, but the weapon had recently been fired. Thomas was moved into Caldermere Hall, where the surgeon declared he would survive. When the boy regained consciousness, he explained that he had seen Mr. Vale hide the ingot days earlier. After the fire, he retrieved it, intending to bring it to Theodora. A masked rider had intercepted him in the courtyard. Could you identify the rider? Conrad asked. Thomas shook his head. But the horse wore a blue and silver saddlecloth. Theodora recognized those colors. They belonged to Lord Merrick Sloane, a nobleman overseeing part of the royal palace construction. Sloane had strongly supported awarding the glass contract to Caldermere. He had also insisted that Sebastian supervise transportation. The conspiracy reached beyond Conrad's brother. That afternoon, the Crown Commissioners arrived earlier than expected. They inspected the burned office, the counterfeit panes, and the silver recovered from the garden. Sebastian was brought before them under guard. He claimed Theodora had hidden the silver and forced Thomas to accuse him. When asked about Vale and Mercer, he called the receipts forgeries. When shown the altered notebook, he insisted the replacement paper had been purchased by Theodora herself. His lies were careful enough to create doubt. Then the senior commissioner delivered worse news. The palace has received a second shipment bearing Caldermere's seal. Lord Sloane personally guaranteed its quality. Theodora's pulse quickened. Where are those panes now? Installed in the coronation gallery. Remove them immediately. The king attends an inspection there tomorrow morning. Conrad stepped forward. Then postpone the visit. We cannot cancel a royal engagement based solely on your wife's suspicions, especially while she remains accused of theft and sabotage. Theodora opened the padded case and held the counterfeit fragment toward the light. The black metallic thread inside the crack had spread since the previous night. Fine branches now reached toward the edges. This glass is undergoing delayed fracture, she said. Changes in temperature will weaken it from within. Tomorrow morning, sunlight will strike the gallery windows. How long before they fail? The commissioner asked. I cannot know without testing the full panes. An hour? A day? Perhaps minutes. The commissioner's face lost its color. Conrad ordered his fastest carriage prepared. The royal palace was nearly 8 hours away. As Theodora gathered her tools, a servant rushed in carrying a telegram from London. The message contained only one sentence. The coronation windows have begun to crack. The message had been relayed through the Admiralty semaphore stations. It was already nearly an hour old. Theodora, Conrad, and the senior commissioner left Caldermere at once. 2 mounted guards rode ahead to change horses along the road, while a second carriage carried her testing equipment and the recovered silver. Sebastian remained locked under guard. For the first 2 hours, Conrad said nothing. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. I should have listened when you rejected the cheaper formula. Yes. I allowed Sebastian to convince me that you wanted control more than you wanted the estate to prosper. You believed him because that explanation comforted you. His face tightened, but he did not deny it. I resented that the workers trusted you. I saw their respect as proof of my own failure. So you destroyed my authority to restore yours. I did. Theodora turned toward the window. She had waited months to hear him admit it, yet the words brought no relief. A confession made in a carriage, while lives remained in danger, repaired nothing. Help me prevent the windows from killing someone, she said. We will speak of the marriage afterward. They reached London shortly before dawn. At the palace, guards had closed the coronation gallery, but Lord Merrick Sloane was arguing with the royal architect outside its doors. The cracks are superficial, Sloane insisted. Removing the panes now would insult the king and ruin Caldermere. Theodora stepped from the carriage holding the counterfeit fragment. Open the gallery, Sloane's expression hardened. The woman accused of sabotaging the contract has no authority here. The royal commissioner handed him the crown order. She does now. Inside, morning light was beginning to touch the upper windows. Hairline fractures spread across several enormous panes, so fine they resembled frost. Theodora approached the nearest one but stopped several feet away. A faint ticking filled the gallery. Glass under pressure. Clear the room, she ordered. Sloane laughed. This spectacle has gone far enough. A sharp crack answered him. Theodora seized the architect's arm and pulled him backward. Conrad dragged Sloane away, just as the upper corner of the window burst inward. Hundreds of fragments rained across the marble floor. More cracks followed. Theodora ordered the heavy velvet curtains released. Workmen cut the supporting cords, allowing the fabric to fall across the weakened windows and contain the worst of the flying glass. Within minutes, the gallery was covered in glittering shards. If the king's inspection had begun as planned, dozens of people would have been standing beneath them. Sloane tried to leave. Conrad blocked the doorway. You guaranteed those panes. I relied upon Caldermere's seal. You arranged their transport with my brother. That proves nothing. Theodora knelt beside a broken pane. Embedded near its edge was a tiny oval stamp invisible from a distance. Vale and Mercer. She showed it to the commissioner. These were never made at Caldermere. The commissioner ordered Sloane searched. Inside his coat, the guards found a receipt for the remaining 6 silver ingots and a passenger ticket for a ship departing for France that evening. Still, Sloane smiled. You have counterfeit glass and stolen silver, he said, but no proof that I ordered either. Sebastian Halston will testify that the Duchess designed the scheme. A palace servant hurried into the ruined gallery. Sir, the prisoner from Caldermere has escaped. Conrad went rigid. Sebastian? He injured a guard and fled before dawn. Theodora examined Sloane's receipt again. A handwritten note on the back instructed that payment be delivered to a private warehouse beside the Thames at noon. Sebastian would go there for the remaining silver, or for passage out of England. Theodora rose. We can still catch him. Before they could leave, the royal commissioner unfolded a second report. There is another problem. Caldermere glass was installed in 3 hospitals and a military officer's residence last month. Theodora stared at him. We supplied no such glass. Then someone has been selling counterfeit panes under your name for far longer than we believed. Outside, the sun climbed higher over London. Across the city, hundreds of fraudulent windows were beginning to warm. Theodora divided the crisis before panic could take hold. She gave the royal architect a simple test. Inspect each suspected pane for the tiny Vale and Mercer stamp, and tap its lower corner with a wrapped wooden rod. A clear note meant the glass remained stable. A dull vibration meant pressure had already spread through it. Teams were dispatched to the hospitals and military residents with orders to close the affected rooms and lower every curtain. Then Theodora turned toward Conrad. We go to the warehouse. The royal commissioner assigned 4 officers to accompany them. Lord Sloane was placed under guard, but he continued to insist that Sebastian alone had managed the counterfeit operation. At the Thames warehouse, the doors were locked. Through a broken upper window, Theodora saw stacks of crates bearing the Caldermere crest. Conrad ordered the officers to force an entrance. The building appeared deserted. Inside were hundreds of inferior panes, forged seals, empty silver molds, and account books recording sales under Caldermere's name. The scheme had earned far more than the stolen 12 ingots could explain. Theodora opened the nearest ledger. Payments had been sent to 3 separate accounts, but the final share went to someone identified only as H. Halston. Conrad said bitterly. Sebastian. Perhaps. She examined the entries. Sebastian was reckless and vain, but the records were too precise. Someone had been operating Vale and Mercer's illegal business before he took control of Caldermere. A noise sounded above them. Theodora looked up just as a crate swung from an overhead hoist. Its rope had been cut. Move! She shoved Conrad aside. The crate crashed where he had been standing, exploding into jagged glass. A figure ran along the upper walkway. The crown officers pursued him while Theodora found a second staircase. She reached the roof moments before the fugitive could cross to the adjoining building. It was Mr. Vale. His wrists were bandaged, and terror distorted his face. "You were supposed to be under military protection," she said. "They came for me at the physician's house. I escaped." "Who?" Vale glanced toward the river. Sebastian and Sloane were only useful names. "The person controlling the accounts has access to every royal building contract in London." The person marked H. Before Vale could answer, a shot struck the brick beside his head. Conrad pulled Theodora behind a chimney. Officers fired toward a boat below, but its masked passenger disappeared beneath the bridge. Vale collapsed against the roof tiles. "Harcourt," he gasped. Professor Gideon Harcourt. Theodora felt the truth settle like ice inside her. Professor Harcourt was the independent expert she had intended to trust with the fragments. He had advised the Crown on royal glass for years, and his inspections determined which manufacturers received government contracts. "He approved the counterfeit panes," she said. Vale nodded, "and condemned honest makers who refused to pay him. He revived our company in secret. Why target Caldermere? Your formula lasted too long. Hospitals stopped replacing broken windows. Harcourt's partners were losing money. The scheme was larger than theft. They had weakened the glass deliberately so government buildings would require repeated repairs, each new contract feeding the same hidden accounts. And the missing silver? To make the palace panes fail dramatically. Harcourt wanted Caldermere destroyed, and Sloane's preferred company chosen in its place." Footsteps sounded behind them. Sebastian emerged from the stairwell holding a pistol. Conrad moved in front of Theodora. "Put it down. You always did choose her when it mattered most," Sebastian said. "You merely waited until there was nothing left to save." His hand trembled. He looked exhausted rather than triumphant. "Harcourt will kill you next," Theodora warned. "Sloane has been arrested. Vale is ready to testify." Sebastian glanced at Vale, and fear replaced his anger. "He promised me the dukedom's debts would disappear. You gave him our seal, our roots, and my formulas. And Conrad gave them to me first." The words struck their intended target. Conrad flinched. Sebastian backed toward the edge of the roof. Then another shot came from the river. The bullet struck Sebastian below the ribs. Conrad caught his brother before he fell over the parapet. Sebastian clutched Conrad's coat, blood spreading across his waistcoat. "The proof?" he whispered. "Harcourt keeps it inside the king's new mirror." His fingers closed around a small brass key. Then the bells of a nearby hospital began ringing an emergency alarm. Across the street, one of its enormous windows had started to bow inward, above a ward filled with wounded soldiers. Theodora ran toward the hospital while Conrad remained with his wounded brother. Inside, nurses were moving patients from the ward, but several men could not walk. The great window above them curved inward with each gust of wind, its fractures spreading toward the frame. "Do not touch the glass," Theodora warned. "Bring mattresses, blankets, and every wooden screen you have." The soldiers who could stand pushed the screens together beneath the window. Mattresses were raised behind them, forming a barrier between the failing pane and the remaining beds. Theodora examined the frame from the side. The counterfeit glass had been fitted too tightly. As it warmed, it had nowhere to expand. "If we release one corner, the pressure may lessen. Or the entire pane may fall," the hospital steward said. "It will fall regardless." She wrapped herself in a heavy blanket and struck the lower fixing with a long iron tool. Once, twice. On the third blow, the fastener broke. The glass shifted outward. A jagged crack raced through its center, but the pane did not collapse into the ward. It fractured against the exterior scaffold, where the curtains and mattresses caught most of the shards. The last patients were carried to safety. When Theodora returned to the warehouse, a surgeon had stopped Sebastian's bleeding. He remained unconscious but alive. Conrad held the brass key. He said Harcourt hid the proof inside the king's new mirror. Theodora understood why. The enormous ceremonial mirror had been produced at Caldermere 6 months earlier. Its carved frame contained a hollow compartment designed to hold supporting braces during transport. Harcourt had supervised its installation and personally sealed the rear panel. He could hide documents inside it without risking a search of his office. They returned to the palace under crown escort. The mirror stood in the royal reception chamber, nearly 12 feet high. Theodora found a small lock concealed beneath the lower carving. Sebastian's key opened it. Inside the frame were 3 account books, letters bearing Harcourt's signature, and a list of officials who had accepted payments to approve unsafe glass. There was also a contract dated 2 months earlier. It promised Sebastian control of Caldermere once Theodora was convicted of theft. In exchange, he would transfer the Glassworks to a company secretly owned by Harcourt and Lord Sloane. Conrad read the document twice. My brother planned to sell the estate. He could do so only because you gave him authority. The words were quiet, but Conrad received them without protest. A sealed envelope lay beneath the contract. On its front, Harcourt had written, "Evidence against the Duchess of Halston." Inside were forged letters suggesting that Theodora had ordered the sabotage herself. Conrad's face went pale. "This is what Sebastian showed me before I removed you." "You never showed it to me. I thought confronting you would give you time to destroy the accounts. You had already decided I was guilty." "Yes." No excuse followed. The royal commissioner took possession of the documents. "This is enough to arrest Professor Harcourt." They found his London residence abandoned. His servants claimed he had departed for Caldermere shortly after dawn. Theodora understood his purpose immediately. The original formula archive. If Harcourt destroyed it, Caldermere could not prove which buildings contained authentic glass. Every safe pane would become suspect, and the estate would lose all remaining contracts. Conrad ordered fresh horses. They reached Caldermere after nightfall and saw flames behind the Glassworks. This time, the fire had begun inside Theodora's private laboratory. Workers fought it from the courtyard, but the door had been barred from within. Then Thomas pointed toward the roof. A man was crossing the narrow glass passage connecting the laboratory to the old furnace tower. Professor Harcourt carried Theodora's formula chest beneath one arm. The passage walls were made from experimental panes she had installed years earlier. Heat from the fire was already weakening their iron supports. Conrad reached for the door. Theodora stopped him. "If you enter from this side, the passage may collapse." "Then how do we reach him?" She looked toward the furnace controls. "We do not follow him. We force him back." But before she could move, Harcourt raised a pistol and aimed through the glass, directly at Thomas. Theodora struck Thomas to the ground an instant before the pistol fired. The bullet passed through the glass wall and buried itself in the workshop door. A white fracture spread from the hole, branching across the passage between Harcourt and the furnace tower. "Stay down," she ordered. Harcourt aimed again, but Conrad dragged Thomas behind a stone water trough while the workers scattered for cover. Theodora ran toward the furnace controls. The old tower contained a chimney connected to the experimental furnace beneath the passage. If she opened the lower air vents and closed the upper damper, smoke would rise through the floor grates ahead of Harcourt. He would be forced to retreat toward the laboratory. But the furnace had not been used in years. The controls were stiff with rust, and opening them in the wrong order could send flames into the passage instead of smoke. Conrad followed her. "Tell me what to do. Turn the lower wheel when I raise my hand, not before." "What are you doing?" "Giving Harcourt a reason to come back." She pulled the release lever. Nothing moved. Across the courtyard, Harcourt kicked at the door to the furnace tower. If he reached the stone staircase beyond it, he could escape into the woods behind the estate. Theodora wrapped both hands around the lever and pulled again. Pain shot through her old wrist injury, but the mechanism shifted with a metallic groan. She raised her hand. Conrad turned the wheel. The lower vents opened. Air rushed through the furnace, stirring the remaining embers. Theodora closed the upper damper halfway, directing smoke toward the passage. Black clouds seeped through the floor grates near Harcourt's feet. He turned back, coughing, but quickly recognized what she had done. "You always were clever, Duchess," he shouted through the fractured glass. "That is why your husband found you so intolerable." Theodora held the lever steady. "Put down the chest and surrender. Do you imagine those papers will save Caldermere? The Crown will never trust your name again." "The Crown may decide that after hearing the truth," Harcourt laughed. "Truth belongs to whoever writes the report." He raised his pistol and fired at the furnace controls. The bullet struck the metal housing beside Theodora. The lever jerked from her hands, and the damper dropped fully closed. Flames surged beneath the passage. "Release the wheel," she shouted. Conrad tried, but the mechanism had locked. Heat climbed through the floor, turning the fractured glass walls orange. Harcourt abandoned the tower door and ran back toward the laboratory. With every step, the passage shuddered. Theodora saw a dangerous change in the panes. The cracks around the bullet hole had begun to whiten. Within seconds, the entire wall would fail. "Everyone away from the passage." Workers retreated behind the stone buildings. Harcourt was halfway across when the first pane burst outward. He stumbled, dropping his pistol. The formula chest slid across the glass floor and stopped against the damaged wall. He lunged for it. "Leave it!" Theodora cried. Instead, Harcourt wrapped both arms around the chest. The iron support beneath him gave way. Conrad ran forward, but Theodora caught his sleeve. "You cannot reach him." The central section of the passage dropped several inches. Harcourt fell against the remaining frame, one leg hanging over the courtyard. The chest slipped from his grasp and crashed onto a lower roof, where it broke open without catching fire. Documents scattered across the tiles. Harcourt clung to an iron brace. "Help me," he shouted. The workers stared at the man who had endangered their families and destroyed their livelihood. No one moved. Theodora took a coil of transport rope from the wall. Conrad looked at her in disbelief. "He tried to kill you. If we let him fall, his accomplices will call it revenge. I want him alive when the evidence is read." Together, they looped the rope around a stone pillar. Conrad and 4 workers lowered its end toward the passage. Harcourt seized it seconds before the remaining glass collapsed. They dragged him onto the courtyard stones. The moment he was safe, a crown officer placed him in irons. "You should have let me die," Harcourt said to Theodora. "No. You will answer questions." The fire was contained before it reached the main archive. The formula chest had been damaged, but most of its contents survived. Among the scattered papers, Theodora found her original production records and a series of inspection reports bearing Harcourt's seal. Each counterfeit shipment had first been rejected by a junior inspector. Harcourt had changed the results afterward and replaced the original reports with false approvals. More important was a folded list of building locations. It identified every property containing Vail and Mercer glass, along with the date and exact batch used. Theodora could now locate the unsafe panes before more people were injured. Near midnight, Sebastian regained consciousness in Caldermere Hall under guard. The surgeon warned that he might not survive another day. Conrad and Theodora entered his room with the royal commissioner. Sebastian looked at the shackles around his wrist, then at his brother. "Harcourt?" he asked. "Captured," Conrad said. The account books were recovered from the palace mirror. Sebastian closed his eyes. Conrad placed the contract beside him. "You intended to sell Caldermere after Theodora was convicted. I intended to save what you were too weak to control. You framed my wife." Sebastian gave a faint, humorless smile. "I gave you an accusation. You did the rest." Conrad flinched, but this time he did not turn away. "You forged the ledgers and her formula book." "Yes." "You stole the silver, with Sloane's help. And the roof collapse?" Sebastian's breathing became shallow. Harcourt ordered Vail to weaken the supports. He wanted the damaged batch shipped before Theodora could examine it. "You knew workers might die. I knew you would blame her if they did." Conrad's face went white. Sebastian had understood his resentment perfectly and built the scheme around it. The commissioner wrote down every word. "Why did Harcourt require the silver?" Theodora asked. "To finance the counterfeit workshop and bribe the inspectors. But he also wanted it discovered under your authority. Once the palace glass failed, the crown would believe you had stolen silver to fund sabotage. And Thomas?" "I did not shoot him. Sloane sent a groom to recover the ingot." "What about the records fire?" "Vail started it. I ordered him to burn only the shipping pages, but the flames spread." Theodora studied him. "You still speak as though the consequences were accidents." Sebastian looked away. Before leaving, Conrad paused at his brother's bedside. "I gave you authority because I wanted what Theodora had earned. You used it because you knew I would protect my pride before I protected the truth." Sebastian's eyes opened. "Then perhaps we are both exactly what Father believed us to be." Conrad left without answering. At dawn, the Crown Commissioner assembled the workers in the Glassworks courtyard. He announced Harcourt's arrest, Sloane's detention, Sebastian's confession, and the immediate removal of all fraudulent pains. Then he turned to Conrad. "As owner of Caldermere, Your Grace, you must explain why the Duchess's warnings were ignored and why her authority was transferred without a proper inquiry." Conrad looked toward the hundreds of workers he had forced to witness Theodora's humiliation. He could have blamed his brother. He could have claimed he had been deceived. Instead, he stepped onto the same stone platform where he had dismissed her. "I accused my wife without proof," he said. "I removed her because I resented the authority she had earned. I handed her work, her records, and my seal to a man whose claims I never examined." The workers remained silent. The conspiracy succeeded because I gave it access to Caldermere. Every injury, every lost wage, and every danger created by that decision is partly my responsibility. Theodora listened without rescuing him from the shame of saying it. Conrad announced that the suspended injury payments would be restored from his personal funds. Master Alden and the other wounded workers would receive lifetime pensions. Thomas would be granted an apprenticeship under a master of his own choosing. Finally, Conrad faced Theodora. "I cannot return authority I had no moral right to take. But before the crown and every worker present, I withdraw every accusation against Duchess Theodora Halston. The royal commissioner raised a hand. The correction is necessary, Your Grace. It is not sufficient. He unfolded an official order. The following morning, a public hearing would be held in the coronation gallery. Harcourt, Sloane, Sebastian, Conrad, and Theodora would testify before representatives of the crown. If Theodora failed to establish the full evidence chain, Caldermere's royal warrant would be revoked, its assets seized, and its workers dismissed. If she succeeded, the men responsible would face judgment in the same room their counterfeit windows had nearly destroyed. Theodora looked toward the rising sun, reflected in the surviving panes of her glassworks. Tomorrow, the truth would no longer belong to whoever wrote the report. It would belong to whoever could prove it. The coronation gallery reopened beneath lowered curtains and a ceiling of empty window frames. Representatives of the crown sat where the shattered glass had fallen. Behind them stood the palace architect, Caldermere's senior craftsmen, hospital officials, and families of the injured workers. Professor Harcourt entered in chains. Lord Sloane followed under armed guard. Sebastian, too weak to stand, was brought in under a physician's care. Conrad took his place among the accused rather than beside his wife. Theodora stood alone before the royal commission. She began with 2 fragments marked as Batch 47. One had been made at Caldermere, the other carried Vale and Mercer's hidden stamp and contained excessive alkali, mixed with metallic slag. The counterfeit glass was designed to appear flawless during inspection, she explained. But sunlight and ordinary temperature changes caused pressure to build inside it. The panes cracked because the mixture was unstable, and the frames allowed no room for expansion. Next, she presented the original inspection reports recovered from her formula chest. Junior inspectors had rejected the glass. Harcourt replaced their findings with false approvals. The account books from the King's Mirror showed the motive. Harcourt's partners profited whenever unsafe windows broke and government buildings required replacements. Caldermere's durable formula threatened that income. So he needed my work discredited, Theodora said, and my glassworks placed under someone he could control. Sebastian had forged her formula notebook and financial records using handwriting samples kept in her office. Sloane had transported Vale and Mercer panes inside crates bearing Caldermere's seal. The stolen silver paid for the illegal workshop and bribed inspectors, while 6 ingots were buried at Caldermere to support the accusation against her. Finally, she placed Conrad's 12 signed orders before the commission. My husband did not design the conspiracy, she said, but he gave Sebastian unrestricted access to his seal. He ignored my technical warnings, accepted altered records without examination, and removed me before I could discover the substitution. Harcourt rose abruptly. This woman is protecting her husband. No, Theodora replied. I am identifying his exact responsibility. He was deceived because he chose resentment over evidence. That choice gave you the authority you required. Conrad did not protest. The palace architect confirmed that Theodora's original panes had never failed. Thomas identified Vale as the man who carried contaminants into the mixing room. Master Alden described the weakened roof support. Vale testified that Harcourt ordered the sabotage, while Sebastian's signed confession established how the forged records had been planted. The evidence formed an unbroken chain. Harcourt had created the scheme. Sloane had used his political position to distribute counterfeit glass. Sebastian had surrendered Caldermere's formulas, seals, and reputation in exchange for promised control. Conrad had opened the door for all of them. By late afternoon, the commission delivered its judgment. Harcourt and Sloane would face criminal prosecution for fraud, bribery, attempted murder, and endangering the royal household. Their property would be seized to finance the removal of every unsafe pane. Sebastian would be stripped of all estate authority and prosecuted for forgery, theft, conspiracy, and the destruction of evidence. His confession and cooperation would be considered, but neither would erase the danger he had knowingly created. Caldermere's royal warrant would remain in force, but not under Conrad's sole control. The crown recognized Theodora as director of the Glassworks and granted her independent authority over its production, contracts, and accounts. Conrad could neither dismiss her nor transfer those powers without review by the Royal Commission. The accusation of theft was formally withdrawn from every public record. Outside the gallery, workers waited for the verdict. When Theodora appeared, Master Alden removed his cap. Then every craftsman did the same. She had entered the palace as an accused woman. She left with her name restored and her work legally protected from the husband who had tried to erase it. Conrad waited until they returned to Caldermere before asking to speak with her. He met her in the counting room where the betrayal had begun. The amended royal contract still lay inside the evidence box. He removed the page bearing Sebastian's name and placed the original document before her. "I have transferred my personal share of the Glassworks into a trust, controlled by you and the workers," he said. "The injury fund has been restored, with enough capital to continue even if Caldermere loses future contracts." Theodora examined the deed. It gave her genuine security rather than another promise dependent upon his goodwill. "I have also written to every commissioner and supplier who received the accusation," Conrad continued. "The correction bears my signature alone. I did not ask them to excuse me because Sebastian deceived me. That is what you owed them, and what I owed you." His voice lowered. "I loved you, Theodora. But I wanted your brilliance to make me powerful without ever making me feel small. When it did, I punished you for it." She looked at the man who had once shared her hopes, then publicly destroyed her name to preserve his pride. Perhaps he had finally understood what he had done. Understanding, however, did not rebuild trust. "I will remain at Caldermere until the counterfeit glass has been replaced," she said. "After that, I am moving into the house attached to the Western workshop." Conrad's face tightened with pain. "You are leaving me. I am separating my life from your authority. What happens afterward will be decided by what you do over time, not by what you feel today." He bowed his head. "I will not interfere. You will also surrender control of my correspondence, income, travel, and household staff. I have already instructed the solicitor." For once, Conrad did not ask for forgiveness. He did not reach for her or make his remorse another burden she was expected to soothe. He simply stepped aside. Over the following months, Caldermere replaced every fraudulent pain without charge. The recovered funds paid injured workers and supported the families harmed by Harcourt's scheme. Thomas became Theodora's apprentice, while Master Alden supervised the rebuilding of the cooling room. Conrad testified publicly at each trial. His admission cost him political influence, 2 honorary appointments, and much of his standing at court. He accepted those losses without asking Theodora to reward him. On the first morning of winter, she entered the completed Western workshop. Above its doors hung a new sign: Caldermere Glassworks Director. Theodora Halston, crafted under. The authority of its workers, Conrad, stood at the edge of the courtyard, far from the platform where he had once stripped her of command. He waited for permission before approaching. Theodora saw him, then turned the iron key in the workshop door herself. She did not invite him inside. Not yet. But neither did she surrender the choice.